Okay. You may have to kind of watch, if you can watch for questions, because I can't have Facebook up while he's
Okay.
doing this, or Facebook thinks someone's hacking me, apparently.
I will jump on there. And since we're live, hello, everybody. I'm Josh Heston
Hello.
with Dark Ozarks. You guys, this is really the behind the scees part. I'm just busy doing research.
And I'm trying to get my computer to work.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, we had a great weekend.
Yes, we did. Yes, we did.
That was really, really cool. That was the first time since, oh my goodness.
Yeah. There we go.
That was awesome. That was the first time since, oh wow, in a long time that we actually got to get together for real. And
yeah, a little over 2 months, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, we were good. We did what we were supposed to do, what we've been told to do, although we're both Celtic and we don't follow instructions worth a hooey.
No. But we also are supporting where we're
Oh my God,
at.
Yes. Jim Ridenauer, we hope you're watching.
Jim, thank you.
Yes. Oh, so do we want to just visit a little bit about Newtonia?
Why don't we do that just a bit, and then we can go into the story we were talking about before we got started.
Okay. That's good. Well, first of all, Saturday was the first time I had ever been to Newtonia. Was there specifically to see the Civil War Cemetery and the Ritchie Mansion, and met you guys there. And wow, and we got some
filming done too.
What's that?
And we actually got some filming done too.
Mm-hmm. We did. We did. And of course it's a pre-Civil War town. I guess at this point, I mean, to a certain degree, Blinken, you might miss it. It's a very small town at this point. Mm-hmm. Very beautiful location. And it is in that something that we have talked a lot about over the course of our videos is thresholds and liminal spaces. And I would put Newtonia in that, both from a historical standpoint, pivotal decisions that affected the state of Missouri and ultimately affected the outcome of the Civil War, ultimately affecting the nation. Amazing to stand in a building where you knew that these conversations were had that impacted ultimately the fate of our nation in various significant ways. And now in this admittedly beautiful home, but in a corner of the Ozarks that a lot of people would just drive by.
Exactly. I mean, it is one of those things that it's not on the beaten path anymore, but it was a very strategic place then. And it was a little unusual because Mr. Ritchie was a strong Union man, and for much of the war, at least unofficially, it was Confederate controlled by guerrillas.
Yes.
And so younger Mr. Ritchie, Matthew, actually had a Indian brigade. Mm-hmm. And that's probably a lot of what kept it safe, that it wasn't burnt down. Mm-hmm. There's a real, well, I guess we should say too, I mean, you have all of this guerrilla warfare. You've got spies and couriers. You've got the future Belle Starr, who is anything but what you would think of as the bandit queen that hanging Judge Parker had a personal vendetta against for 10 years later. She was a 15-year-old little girl that was probably 90 pounds soaking wet, and most people probably wouldn't give her a second look, but she was a debutante, spoke multiple languages, very bright, and being John Shirley's daughter, was an expert horsewoman,
Yes.
and she was captured by the Union a couple of times, and she had been taken to the Ritchie Mansion in order to be questioned. And at least the romanticized version is that she escaped by jumping out the bedroom window from the second floor onto the back of a horse.
Yes.
Um, the interesting thing is that's entirely possible. She had the skills to do that.
Yeah.
So you had a lot of intrigue going on. You had a lot of these things going on.
And
And
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna. I just wanted to insert really quickly because from a historical perspective, to me this is very striking, and this comes back to actually something that I thought about with the Kendrick House, and it fits over with Belstar and Newtonia as well. We oftentimes associate the Ozark region with quote unquote backwoods hillbillies.
Mm-hmm.
And as you get into, especially reading, go back to the Civil War and read the letters, read the accounts, the reports. For example, we have Belstar, who would later become the bandit queen of the Old West, who at 19 years old was not only literate, she was multilingual.
Yes.
She could play multiple instruments. She was exquisitely educated. And I think that it is easy for us today to do, it's a disservice to our forebears to create these blanket generalities and assume that that our ancestors were not as well educated as we are. In many cases, they were better educated, and I think we really see that in the 19th century.
Well, and just a couple of extra examples really illustrate that. I think the contrast, and going from the Civil War into that outlaw frontier state afterwards. The James brothers, they came from a very educated family. Frank James carried a book of Shakespeare on all of their robberies and quoted Shakespeare frequently while they were robbing trains. The younger brothers, and oh, by the way, Belstar, Myra Bell Shirley, she knew the James brothers and she knew the younger brothers as children. Although they were up from more around Kansas City, their families knew each other.
Yeah.
The younger brothers, I think it was their grandfather, I believe, was one of the founders of Jackson County of Kansas City. These were not just hillbilly peasants who were disgruntled. They, in many ways, could put us to shame as far as their education.
Yeah.
And the Ritchies at Newtonia appeared to be very much the same.
Yes.
And it was, it's telling. We hear about the battles. There were 2 battles there and so forth. And we know there was a lot of guerrilla warfare. And a lot of times in Southwest Missouri, we concentrate on the Confederates, but the Union units often, or at least some of the men, would act as guerrillas in their free time. And one of those was Robert Christian, who is he actually was killed in action at the Second Battle of Newtonia, is buried in the Civil War cemetery there in a nice vault, and has has the official military plaque. Actually, it misspells and lists him in a Maryland unit instead of Missouri unit. However, locally, he was referred to by a lot of people as a Union guerrilla, and executed quite a few people. There were a group of men over at Exeter, over by towards Cassville, that he and he's referred to as his guerrilla gang, killed 4 or 5 men, and by shooting them all in the right eye and blowing the brains being blown out of the skull. The brains removed, put in their hats, and sat beside the bodies.
Wow.
Yeah. So there was a lot of violence on both sides. He killed a Confederate guerrilla fighter named Moore, and that ultimately was his undoing. When he killed Moore, the story goes, and it was actually reported in the history of Newton County, published in 1888, that he decapitated Moore, cut his ears off, and took the decapitated head home, showed it to his wife, who was pregnant. And here's the dark tale for Ozarks, is then she went into labor and gave birth to a baby with no ears.
Wow.
Supposedly, anyway. So seeing this earless decapitated head. And then comes along the Second Battle of Newtonia, and which was only a few days later, apparently. And upon Mr. Moore's son, who was also a Confederate, and he actually rode under Joe Shelby, he asked for furlough from General Shelby for a few days to go kill the man that killed his father, and ironically found him at the battle. And he had been captured by the Confederates and walked up and shot him dead, and then scalped him.
It was a wild and woolly time.
Yes. It was a bit of an eye for an eye situation. But,
in some cases, literally, wow. And so do we want to talk about the cemetery there in Newtonia?
Sure.
It was the first time I'd been there. It's not the first time that you've been there multiple times.
Yes.
It was the first time I'd been there. I love because I got to the Ritchie Mansion, then texted you and said, "Can you send me the Google address?" You said, "We're at the cemetery." I said, "Can you send me the Google address?" You said, "What is it? Go to Mill Street, turn on Market, or go on Market?"
Yeah, go down Mill Street to Market and go north.
And turn and keep going until there's no place else. You're there.
Yeah, until you run out of road.
You run out of road. It is a powerful place.
Mm-hmm.
It feels very sacred. It feels very holy in a sense. It also feels very set aside. You sort of drive through a bit of a swamp, and to get there, and then it just sort of opens up, and it's very, very old.
It's very, very old, very set off from everything around it. And there are other graves of men who died at the battles there, and a lot of burials from that time period, and some later.
Yes.
Some very, very old, probably virgin trees that are standing in the cemetery. I thought it was interesting that we saw the 3 eagle feathers laying on the ground. Probably the biggest eagle feathers I've ever actually seen, just laying on the ground.
Just on the ground. And of course, that's I guess we didn't really jump into this, but I hope everyone was having a very safe and positive Memorial Day.
Yes. and remembering everyone that has made the ultimate sacrifice in all the wars in our history. And,
yes.
And that is part of why we started with this, to show that certainly sacrifices have been made, and certainly not as many have not been as glamorous as is often portrayed in movies, and that each gave their life for this country.
Mm-hmm. And it's and I think in varying ways, of course, being in that Civil War cemetery, varying ways, realizing that perhaps to me, the most inspiring and positive thing that comes from studying Civil War history and studying it within the context of the history, we've talked about that, is that after that immense conflict on American soil, that so many lives were lost, that I would say very brave and very gallant men on both sides ultimately laid down their weapons and helped us forge the nation again.
Yes, and it's certainly not necessarily always smoothly or
No.
easily, but and for anyone who doubts that, you should look at the old footage of some of the reunions of veterans that happened after the advent of the movie camera, and where they do the interviews even up until the early 1930s, and you will see former Confederates and former Union soldiers standing there talking about the battles that they were at. And one of them, actually, the most eerie, that gives me the most goosebumps, is one. It was a fella that actually witnessed General Nathaniel Lyon be killed at Wilson's Creek.
Yes.
And he's telling this in his very old age. It was around 1930, and he tells the story that Lyon made the final charge and ended up being shot off his horse, and the fellow telling it is a Confederate, by the way, and that as he has been, men are coming on him and with bayonets and shooting him further, that he keeps fighting to the point he's throwing rocks and takes out several, and then he stops and says, "I've never seen a more brave man than General Lyon," and then goes on to really pay him homage. And this was the general he was fighting against, but somehow they were able to recognize that often, and on both sides, and go on, not perfectly, but that's what got this country going again.
It is, and it's perhaps only a facet of what we talk about with Dark Ozarks, but I think it's particularly poignant today. It's very easy to judge our forebears by the context and the morality of modern day America, and if we do that, we do first of all, we do our ancestors a great disservice, just as much as it is difficult enough for ourselves to be judged by our contemporaries. How much more would we prefer not to be judged by individuals 200 years down the road or 150 years into our future? It would be very, very unfair. But with that, I think we also do ourselves a disservice. And we talked about the fact that many of these men and women, and in some cases almost children, were first of all far more educated than we oftentimes give them credit for, even on the frontiers and in the borders. And quite frankly, they were not perfect. We are not perfect. They did the best they could with the information that they had in front of them. And out of that, they learned, and ultimately they helped forge the nation that we have today. If we dismiss all that, we also dismiss their lessons.
Exactly. And we do ourselves a disservice then, too.
We do. It's meaningful to understand that history is a lesson book. Many things in the past are quote unquote problematic. They are painful. They are difficult to read sometimes, it is crucial that we study this, because this is how we learn not to make those mistakes again.
Exactly. Exactly. That being said,
Yes.
what do you want to talk about next?
Oh, well,
Maybe something not quite solemn.
it was something. Okay, so at the Civil War Cemetery, I drive down the little street that turns into a gravel road that then goes into a swamp that is shrouded by trees. And and I know I'm at the right place because I park, well, first of all, because your car's there, but second of all, there's the gates to the cemetery. I walk out, I walk into this almost, holy space. It feels like the Deep South. First day, I think Saturday was the first day in 2020. It felt like summer. It was 90 degrees. And in that, with all of that water, that swampland around the cemetery, just this cloud of unseen humidity rising. I walk through the gates, I take like 3 steps over, and something is moving.
Yep.
And it is a probably 4+ foot rat snake.
Yep.
Probably female. In my mind, I named her Sadie. I don't know. But oh my gosh. And I should post a video. She was huge.
Yeah.
And curious. I think that was the funny thing. Very curious. I don't think she was accustomed to people wandering around. I don't know. Or maybe she was so accustomed that she just went, oh, what are you here for? A little tentative. So, slithers between the gravestones, and long enough that she can slither through multiple gravestones at the same time.
Yes.
And then goes over to one of those virgin cedar trees, massive old cedar tree, and a lot of it is rotted out, and there's some poke weeds that are growing up on the side, and just sort of tentatively starts going around the tree. This snake is so large, it wraps halfway around this very large cedar tree. I have video. So it's not like one of those fish stories. I have video. Wraps around just probably, I would say, about that big around.
Yeah, I'd say she was. Yeah, she was big.
Thickest point, wraps around, and then starts, walling herself up in a ball in the crevice of the trunk. And then that's what you guys came over and found her in there. There was a lot of snake piled on top of itself underneath those. Anyway, wow. I've slowly come to become fascinated by snakes, but that is not my natural state of mind. And of course, a huge shout out to anybody who doesn't know. Rat snakes, first of all, they are constrictors. They are not dangerous to humans whatsoever. They are not venomous. And more importantly, they not only do they hunt rats as a constrictor, they also hunt they hunt venomous species. So if you find a rat snake or a king snake, look them up. They are kind of pretty. And some people would say they're absolutely beautiful. I mean, they're very glossy. And they will actually keep venomous snakes away, or they will hunt venomous snakes. So before you go indiscriminately killing animals, check out what you're checking out.
Exactly. And because, you can cause yourself more harm by getting rid of that snake and something else coming along.
When you think about that, and I think this is so it's poignant and powerful. I mean, it's a powerful lesson. You can, if for example you went on an indiscriminate snake killing spree, you might end up with more copperheads than you knew what to do with, because they could move in afterward. So protect your rat snakes, protect your king snakes in particular, and they'll look after your spaces. Still not something you necessarily want in the house. That's just me. But
I'm not real big on, especially 4-foot snake in the house.
but if you're a snake person, I don't know. They probably would make good pets. I'm looking. Brent Thomas says he used to have a California king snake and a corn snake and a boa. So, howdy, Brent.
Well, I mean, it's great. I mean, I have a son that does keep a small snake and also tarantulas and so forth, and they've grown on me some. I've
Yeah,
never been afraid of spiders or anti-spiders because for the same reason, because a lot of spiders keep things you don't want away, but
yes.
But it's given me a better appreciation. So, Brett, that's great that you've kept snakes before, because I think it gives you it's kind of like history. It gives you a little different perspective than the average person on wildlife.
It does. And so with that, what I wanted to visit with you about, and I still want to find one of these. They say they are cryptids. They say they don't actually exist. There are a lot of stories, both in the Ozarks and in Appalachia, about hoop snakes.
Yes.
I want to find a hoop snake.
I've never heard a story that I felt like was okay. I think that's more than the legend. But why don't you describe the legend for anyone that doesn't know?
Yeah. So hoop snakes are the legend is that when you encounter a hoop snake, rather than curling up in coils, it actually makes an Ouroboros, is what it does. The world serpent. That's the legend, and so that it circles around to form a hoop, holds its body rigid, and then rolls like a hoop through the forest. And then some of them go as far as say there's a couple of different things, but the next part of it said that they had a spike-like or a stinger or venomous tail, and they would roll tail first and then turn themselves into a spear. They would flatten themselves out and then impale something that they were trying to attack. And of course the legend is that somebody ducked out of the way, impaled a tree, and then the tree died from the venom.
Yes. That's usually the story that you hear. To me, though, I think it's one of those that's almost the old world coming to the new world, because it's a very Celtic story.
It is.
The world snake. And people may be familiar with a lot of Celtic jewelry that have that motif of the snake swallowing its tail, and that's what it's about. It's about basically the cycle of life and the circle of life, and everything's connected and renewal.
Yes.
I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. Why particularly it turned into these accounts. And over here, I mean, obviously, Celtic heritage was common for people in Appalachia and the Ozarks. But as far as what they could be seen, I really don't know if there's something to it.
I know. I do think that you put yourselves in our Celtic, our Scotch Irish ancestors, coming certainly with a great internal and emotional library of I'm going to say tales, folk tales, folklore, but with the understanding that for our peoples, the folklore was our cosmology. It is how we made sense of the world around us.
Yes.
And I think it's, with the exception of the infiltration of pop culture, I think it still can be. I think that's what folklore does. It is our personal cosmology, which is why people are so, when you quote unquote challenge a story, it can be very upsetting, because it's not just a story. To an anthropologist, to somebody from the outside, it may just be a story. So what?
Right.
But to us, whether it is personal or whether it is ancestral, these these collections of tales, whether it's tales that our grandparents told us or tales of where we grew up, these sorts of things, it is our personal cosmology. It is how we make sense of a world that doesn't make sense. And so you take our peoples, and I feel very comfortable at this point knowing our shared Celtic ancestry, our peoples with the very, very old alchemy concepts of the Ouroboros and the folklore that is associated with that. You include the Norse legends of the world serpent along with the world tree. These concepts, the concepts of dragons, having great meaning, and all of this together. And then our peoples landing, first of all in Appalachia and then in the Ozarks, in this harsh, beautiful, but foreign environment with, a dramatically increased threats. Not only, the overarching political and governance threats, whether that's war with Britain, whether that's, who owns this territory, is it Spain, is it France, is it all of that stuff. Not only the immediate threats of conflict with outlaws, conflict with bandits, conflict with First Nation peoples, but then just the reality. Go back to our peoples in Ireland and England. Going to fetch water was not putting you at risk from a water moccasin.
True.
It was not putting you at risk from a diamondback rattler. It was not putting you at risk from, from copperheads. These types of things. You did not have wolves in great numbers in Europe by that point.
Right.
These types of, we talked about the Joplin tornado. Massive swaths of North America are hit with extremely powerful storms. Just nature as a whole, you think about how harsh it would have been at that point. So I think that you put those two together. How do you make sense? How does your old world cosmology make sense of a field that is populated with rattlesnakes? I think that there's, personally, I would be thrilled if there really was. Well, it would be terrifying, but I would be thrilled if there really was a hoop snake. But even if there isn't, getting into that sort of alchemy and cosmological stew of understanding who our peoples were is almost as rewarding, if not more rewarding.
Oh, I agree. And I do think, it comes down to something, would be seen at times. And it was like the closest that, that they could think of was the old stories. And then it became the idea of the hoop, almost the hoop and stick, game for children in colonial times.
Yes.
And maybe it was a bit of a parable too, to warn children, because, you play with a hoop and stick, but snakes will bite.
Yes. Don't play with the snakes, children. It's not a good idea. And I think you can't help but also bring African American hoodoo and voodoo into this in terms of serpent spirits.
Yes.
That's
fair.
Specifically, I think the Loa Dambala being a sacred snake, and bringing there's layers upon layers of cultural fusions
Mhm.
that occur, and so much of it, bits and pieces that get lost, and then other pieces gets added. It is a cosmological stew.
No, I do agree. But for anyone listening, if you ever come across a hoop snake, I think Josh is looking for a pet. So
At least a photo op.
yes, video preferably.
I
I would
don't,
see a
I have no interest whatsoever in getting photographed with celebrities. I just want a photo op of a hoop snake. That's all.
fair. That's fair.
In the time that we have, we've got some really amazing stories. Big shout out to Mike Walburn, who shared an amazing story. It's not a question, so rather we won't get into it at the moment. But thank you so
Okay.
much for sharing. And I know, Lisa, you can't read what's on Facebook right at the moment,
Yeah.
but it's awesome. Can't wait for you to read it. We will be in
Cool.
touch. And in the time that we have remaining, we got. I thought maybe we might talk a little bit about power doctors.
Sure.
That and if somebody has some personal experience with this, my information, my direct information comes, of course, from Vance Randolph's books, and specifically his book on Ozark magic that was published in 1947. So if you guys have more information or any just a shout out, and are comfortable sharing, we would love to talk with you. But to me, it is such a powerful and interesting concept. It's a little scary, and I think there's some interesting context. I want to get your thoughts on it, Lisa, because
Sure.
the concept of the power doctor is, first of all, almost exclusively, if not exclusively, male. And of course, this
Mhm.
is tends to be a bit of a contrast with your traditional granny women and magic,
True.
which is often, not always, but is often predominantly leans toward female practitioners.
Right.
And so the the power doctor that Vance Randolph talks about is almost exclusively a man. He is an individual who uses magic, and uses, in some cases, is believed to use black magic, but the idea is that he is using it to attack witches,
Mhm.
or to undo their malevolence, or undo the spells, at the very least to neutralize spell casting, but then to move it over into what might even be classified as warfare against witchcraft, using witchcraft. And Vance there's Vance has a whole chapter on it, but there's one line I was looking for in the book, but I can paraphrase it. It's very chilling to me. And he talks about a local witch doctor, or a power doctor, who was punishing a witch in
Mhm.
his mind, and he was doing it essentially through a doll, and that he had taken this figure, this small, called a puppet. He had taken the puppet, he had wrapped it in a shirt of the person that he was attempting to torture, and then he was burning the doll's feet at the hearth.
Mhm.
And Vance, of course, was not superstitious. I think he classified himself somewhere between agnostic and atheist. He was not at all a religious person. And in his notes, he wrote down basically saying, like, I don't believe any of this. He said, but the look on that man's face was something I'll never forget. The look of sadism that was on this man's face. Will not forget it. And he said, under no circumstances would I want that man burning the poppet's feet with my undershirt wrapped around it.
Well, and a couple things come to mind. One is that I always take the Power Doctor story as an Anglicization of voodoo.
Yes.
Because basically what he's doing is very much what a voodoo priest or priestess would do with spells and poppets. And actually what people popularly call a voodoo doll is a poppet.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be, a doll in the image of the person that's being targeted. Often would, if they could, have some of their hair or something that belonged to them, like the shirt.
Yeah.
But anything that belonged to them could be used. And the idea that their energy would be put into the poppet, and then whatever the priestess or Power Doctor did to the poppet would have a similar effect on the victim.
Yes. Yeah.
And there's certainly, some voodoo priestesses and priests who, over time, would target. They'd be specialists instead of generalists, and they might specialize in targeting other practitioners who were causing harm, that kind of thing.
Right.
So it's very similar in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest, I think what it comes down to the idea of, can they manipulate some sort of energy? And does the targeted person believe in the power?
Right. There's a lot of pieces coming together for all of this.
Right. And if you do believe that perhaps there's some people that have gift that can affect other people, and they happen to use these methods, then perhaps it can affect, sort of the evil. It's the idea of the evil eye,
Right.
the same thing, that you can affect a person by what you're doing. And I think a Power Doctor kind of straddles the two worlds between European hoodoo, Caribbean voodoo, and without perhaps quite the connotation that voodoo had, particularly since it was usually associated with the slaves.
Yes.
But it by nature it has a vigilante
Yes, it does.
characteristic that you are judge and jury.
Yes, which is very appropriate considering the vigilante justice here in the Ozarks.
Well, that's true. I mean, it certainly, it certainly fits in with Celtic honor culture. That you decide, well, the opposing clan or whoever, they did wrong, and you can take it on yourself to right the wrong. And I think it's just that one step forward that using those means. And if you're going to use spell work, then, and we don't like what you're doing, then we're going to get someone that has more power than you, theoretically.
And it comes down to, and of course I'm getting really low on battery, unfortunately, but it comes down to, there's the concept of do no harm. It really gets very blurred. It gets very difficult because you're going, what is someone's concept of justice? What is someone's concept of right and wrong? And when those two collide, the outcome at the end of that is really up in the air. It's like, what is your pick on this? It is very, very true in this, as it is in so many cases. Sometimes there are no easy answers.
Well, and to put a little monkey wrench into it, and for particularly those who do follow more modern witchcraft practices, do no harm really does not come into play in these traditions.
No, no, it does not.
Do no harm, rules of three, all of that. That is a 20th century concept.
And coming back to the vigilantism of the frontier, and the fact that you cannot judge the past by the present, a completely different morality in many cases.
Well, it is, and it's fitting with, as I said, with honor culture, that you basically you sell your own scores, and it's often based on family or clanship allegiances. And but the modern concept, particularly in Wicca and so forth, with do no harm, white magic, etc., that is not in these traditions whatsoever. Everything was gray, and it was accepted that it was gray, and that you took a power doctor, by virtue of what he did, accepted that there would be some consequences for him for what he was doing.
Yeah.
And I think that's the distinction, is that in those traditions and in voodoo too, that there's an acceptance that, that some of this may come back on me. And that's something that usually you don't see in the more modern connotations of witchcraft.
Mm-hmm. It is more raw. It is, there is, I think, a difficult to accept, but an honest understanding of human nature.
Yes. I mean, it's not in a tidy box with a bow, but it's, it is definitely human nature that, and really traditions that have gone on for a very long time.
Very long. Yeah, I know.
You can make comparisons to it to the Inquisition. In fact, I mean, the Salem witch trials, etc. I mean, when you want to say that was an inquisitor or the judges at Salem, in some real ways, they stood in the same position as a power doctor.
Yes.
Now that might be a little controversial for a few people, but it's still, I mean, it really is. I mean,
and it just, you have to take this in its own context, and to do that, you have to have a very open mind.
You do. Of course, we are talking about traditions, with power doctors that, at least, anecdotally, aren't that far removed. We're talking 80 years, and it's certainly possible that some of that could be remaining.
Absolutely. And so if somebody does have any stories that they're comfortable sharing, we would love to visit with you.
Even if you want to keep it personal and confidential.
Absolutely. And we can do that. So
yes.
We're going to be back on Instagram on Wednesday night at 7, and then back here on Facebook at 7 p.m. on Friday. And please share Dark Ozarks with every single person that you know. It will help us immensely. And what else we need to share? I'm getting really low on battery, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think that's about it right now. If people have questions or ideas that they want explored, let us know. We are getting back to working on filming, so with your support, hopefully this goes on for quite a while, and we can do quite a few episodes.
Absolutely, we appreciate y'all.
We really do.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks.
See y'all.
Bye.
Bye.